Week 23, Overview, Decisive Years of the Civil War. This week covers 12 months, from July 1862 to July 4th, 1863, and includes some of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. Men of both the North and the South reached the point where there were only two paths before them, victory or death. America entered a new level of warfare, one that began to affect civilians as well as soldiers. Emotionally, physically, and mentally, the war was draining all the people it touched. Abraham Lincoln had a hard job. Though Ulysses S. Grant made significant progress in the West, Lincoln needed to appoint 4 different men as commanders of his largest army, the Army of the Potomac, before he could get a significant victory in the East. Until then, this army suffered horrific losses in battle and terrible suffering during the winter that ate away at their morale. Lincoln was always aware of critics in Congress, press, and people living in the North who were ready to blame him when things went badly, or worse, give up the war effort altogether. During this time, Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederate States of America, also faced massive disappointments. By July 4, 1863, he lost his hold on the Mississippi River Valley, which had been a means of vital supplies from Mexico. Southern ports remained effectively blockaded by Union Navy ships, and no European country would send him badly needed aid. They didn't want to back a loser, on the one hand, nor did most of their people support slavery. By the end of this one-year period, Davis knew that the South's only hope was to fight a defensive war on their home soil and pray that the Northerners would lose their will for war. Abraham Lincoln never wanted war, and at first he tried to keep the focus off of slavery to avoid alienating the remaining slave states that hadn't yet seceded. But his strategy had its downside. It sapped the North's will to fight, and it made Europeans cynical about the war. France and England depended on Southern cotton. They didn't want a great power in the form of a united America on the other side of the Atlantic to compete with. If the Confederacy had any chance of winning, Europeans had a reason to support it. By the middle of 1862, the war in Virginia was going so badly that the Union cause seemed to be unraveling. Lincoln knew that more slaveholding states, like Delaware and Kentucky, might leave the Union. If slaveholding Maryland seceded, the federal capital of Washington, D.C. would be surrounded by Confederate territory. Lincoln came up with a way to rally Northern support without losing the border states. He decided to free the slaves, but not all of them. He only freed the slaves in the states that were in active rebellion, while leaving things unchanged in the border states. He knew that such a proclamation would be controversial, though, so he decided to wait for a significant Union victory before he issued it. He had to wait a while for that victory, at least in the East. We covered the first Battle of Bull Run last week, which the North lost. The second Battle of Bull Run, on August 29, 1862, was just as bad. Southern troops under Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and General James Longstreet attacked Union troops stationed at Manassas. Their bold attack succeeded. General McClellan's Union army had to retreat to Washington. Lee's army marched into Union soil a few days later. He sent Stonewall Jackson off to capture the Federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, while Lee took the rest to the little town of Sharpsburg on Antietam Creek in the border state of Maryland. Lee had issued secret orders to his army, but a Union scout found them wrapped around 3 cigars at a Confederate campsite. The Union general, McClellan, couldn't believe Lee would be so stupid. He thought it must be a trick, and he held back his 90,000 men. That delay was costly. It gave Jackson's men time to join up with Lee. The two armies clashed in the bloodiest single day of the Civil War. 2,000 Union troops were killed and 2,700 Confederates. Nearly 20,000 men were wounded, of whom another 3,000 eventually died. It was a costly battle with no decisive winner, but it was a strategic victory for the North. Lee had to retreat back into Virginia. General McClellan just let him go without pursuit. That was too much for Lincoln. He fired McClellan and replaced him with General Ambrose E. Burnside. Lee's retreat from Maryland gave Lincoln the opportunity he'd been waiting for to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. He declared that all slaves in states that had seceded from the Union were forever free, and ordered Union troops and other federal agents to treat them as free men. Lincoln's proclamation seemed odd. It freed all the slaves in the states he didn't control, and none of the slaves in the states he did. There was a reason for this oddity, however, and it wasn't just that he wanted to win over abolitionists without losing the border states. Lincoln relied solely on the president's war powers. Lincoln believed the Constitution gave the Union whatever powers it needed to preserve itself. As commander-in-chief in a time of war, he believed he had the authority to exercise whatever powers he had to. Emancipating the slaves in rebel territory was just one more weapon in the commander-in-chief's arsenal. Lincoln's new general, Burnside, marched down to Fredericksburg, Virginia, to take on Lee. McClellan had been too cautious to win. Burnside proved to be a little too bold. He tried to storm 73,000 Confederates who had dug into the hills overlooking Fredericksburg, and it cost him 13,000 casualties. Burnside asked Lincoln to relieve him of command, and Lincoln did. Lincoln appointed Joseph Hooker in Burnside's place. By now, the Union Army was much larger than the Confederate Army. On April 27, 1863, it looked like Hooker was poised to outflank Lee at Fredericksburg, but Hooker hesitated. That gave Stonewall Jackson the opportunity to just about cut the Northern Army in two. The battle's been called Lee's perfect battle because he defeated a force twice his size, but it cost him dearly. Stonewall Jackson was accidentally wounded there by his own men. His arm was amputated, and he died 2 weeks later. Lee said, "Jackson has lost his left arm, but I have lost my right arm." Jackson was sorely missed the next major engagement, the central battle of the war, fought in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. This was the South's boldest advance yet. If they could take the war into Union territory, and not just a slave state like Maryland, but the Quaker state of Pennsylvania, they might be able to kill the North's will to fight. Lee marched across Maryland, pushed on 7 miles north of the Mason-Dixon line into Pennsylvania. On July 1, 1863, 75,000 Confederates reached Gettysburg. Lincoln had replaced his top general yet again. Now it was General George Meade, whose 90,000 Union troops countered Lee's forces. The South pushed the Union back on the first day, but Lee no longer had a general with Stonewall Jackson's drive. Lee ordered General Richard Ewell to take Cemetery Hill, an important piece of high ground on the north side of Gettysburg, if practicable. Ewell let him down, and it cost Lee dearly. Jackson would have taken that hill. On the second day of battle, Lee sent his troops down to the south side of town, where Little Round Top ended the high ground where the North had placed artillery. Lee was determined to take Little Round Top and then work his way north along the ridge. But 385 soldiers from Maine held that hill against an assault by the Alabama Brigade. Colonel Joshua Chamberlain's Maine men were outnumbered, out of ammunition, and about to be overrun when he ordered a bayonet charge down the hill. It worked. The Alabama troops fell back, and the Union held its ground. That was the beginning of the end for Lee. His effort to take the ridge from the north fell short the first day. His assault on the south end failed the second day, so the third day, against his better judgment, he ordered a full frontal attack on the Union lines. Major General George Pickett led the charge. Pickett's charge might have worked 20 years earlier, when armies mostly used inaccurate muskets.